The turbulence was a minor thing, a gentle shudder that ran through the fuselage of the Airbus A330 as it sliced through the upper atmosphere over the North Atlantic. For the seasoned flight crew of Apex Air Flight 714, it was less than a coffee spill event. For most of the 283 passengers settled in for the long haul to London, it was a brief, dream-interrupting tremor, nothing more. But for Emily Carter, buckled into her jump seat at the rear of the cabin, it was a physical assault. Her knuckles were bone-white where she gripped the armrests. Her breath hitched, a tiny, imperceptible gasp that was swallowed by the omnipresent drone of the Rolls-Royce Trent 700 engines. Her gaze was fixed on the bulkhead in front of her, but she saw nothing. She was seeing a different sky, a different aircraft, hearing a different, more violent sound. The rattle of a failing airframe. The scream of wind through a shattered canopy. From the front of the aircraft, the voice of the captain crackled over the cabin address system, dripping with a condescending smoothness that set Emily's teeth on edge. "Folks, this is your captain, John Davies, speaking. Just a little bump in the road up here at 38,000 feet. Nothing for our frequent flyers to worry about. And for those of you who might be a little nervous, rest assured, the professionals are in charge. We'll have the seatbelt sign off for you shortly." His tone was meant to be reassuring, but there was a barb in it. A barb aimed directly at the back of the plane. Emily felt the eyes of the other flight attendants on her. She had been with Apex for only 3 months, a senior flight attendant brought in on a special contract, a fact that had already made her an outsider. They saw her quiet demeanor as aloofness, her precision as arrogance. They saw her, a woman in her late 30s with haunted eyes and no past she was willing to share, and they filled in the blanks with their own assumptions. Now, they saw her white-knuckled grip, and their assumptions hardened into perceived fact. She was a nervous flyer. A liability. In the cockpit, Captain John Bulldog Davies leaned back in his leather seat, a smirk playing on his lips. He clicked off the intercom. "Did you see that, Kenji?" he said to his first officer. "Our new senior attendant looks like she's about to claw her way through the floor panels." First Officer Kenji Tanaka glanced away from his instruments, his expression neutral. He had seen Emily's reaction on the cabin monitor. It was odd. Not the flailing panic of a first-time flyer, but a rigid, controlled terror. "Maybe she's just had a bad experience," Captain Tanaka offered, his voice calm and even. Davies snorted, a coarse, dismissive sound. "Bad experience. Right. She's another diversity hire, Tanaka. Pushed through by corporate to fill a quota. They see a woman with some management experience and they stick her on a plane, probably never even asked if she likes flying. Mark my words, when something actually goes wrong, she'll be the first one to lose it." Tanaka did not respond. He had his own reservations about Davies, whose arrogance often outpaced his skill. Bulldog Davies flew by the book, but he lacked the instinct, the deep-seated feel for the machine that separated good pilots from great ones. He also had a well-known prejudice against women in aviation, a relic from a bygone era that he wore like a badge of honor. Tanaka had also seen Emily Carter's file. It was sparse. Almost suspiciously so. There was a 10-year gap in her employment history. Before that, a string of commendations from an entity he did not recognize, Carter Aviation Dynamics. Her references were impeccable, signed by names that carried immense weight in the aerospace industry, yet the file contained no specifics about her role. It was a puzzle, and Kenji Tanaka did not like unsolved puzzles at 38,000 feet. He made a mental note to look up the name later. The flight continued. Emily forced her hands to relax, taking a slow, measured breath as she had been taught. In. Hold. Out. The memory receded, pushed back into the steel-doored vault in her mind where it lived. She unbuckled her belt and began her rounds, her movements fluid and efficient. She offered a warm blanket to an elderly woman, fetched a glass of water for a man with a persistent cough, and calmed a fussy child with a quiet smile and a small airline pin. To the passengers, she was the epitome of grace and professionalism. To the other crew members, her flawless performance was just another reason to resent her. She made it look too easy. Davies, watching on the monitor, saw it as a performance. An act. He decided to test her. He keyed the comm line to the galley. "Miss Carter," his voice boomed, intentionally loud enough for the others to hear. "We have a report of a passenger in 17B feeling unwell. Potentially a cardiac event. Assess and report. Immediately. It was a drill, and a cruel one. There was no sick passenger. He was manufacturing a crisis to see her fail, to expose the nervous wreck he believed her to be. The other flight attendants froze, looking at Emily. This was the captain's way of putting someone in their place. Emily simply nodded, her expression unchanged. "Understood, Captain," she said, her voice a model of calm clarity. She retrieved the onboard medical kit and moved toward row 17. Her steps were unhurried, her demeanor projecting an aura of complete control that was the opposite of the panic Davies had hoped to induce. She found the man in 17B, a portly businessman engrossed in a spreadsheet on his laptop, perfectly healthy. She knelt beside him. "Sir," she said softly, "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Emily. We had a call button from this row. Is everyone here feeling all right?" The man looked up, confused. "I'm fine. Didn't press anything." Emily smiled warmly. "Must have been a system glitch. I'm very sorry to have disturbed you. Can I get you anything?" No, I'm fine." She stood, turned, and walked back to the galley. She keyed the comm, "Captain, situation in 17B is resolved." It was a false alarm. "Passenger is in good health. All secure in the cabin." Her report was crisp, professional, and devoid of any emotion. She did not betray a hint of anger or frustration at the blatant harassment. She had not failed. She had not even flinched. In the cockpit, Davies scowled. He had expected her to panic, to create a scene, to prove him right. Her unnerving composure only infuriated him further. "She's a robot," he muttered to Tanaka. "No real emotion. That's just as dangerous as panic." Tanaka said nothing, but he watched the monitor, a flicker of something that looked like respect in his eyes. He saw the way she had handled it. She had not called out the captain on his lie. She had not made the passenger feel awkward or alarmed. She had de-escalated a non-situation with a surgeon's precision, protecting both the passenger's peace of mind and the captain's authority, however undeserved. It was a masterclass in crew resource management. The kind of thing they taught seasoned aviators. The hours droned on. The campaign of petty torment from the cockpit continued. Davies would accidentally spill his coffee, requiring Emily to make a trip up to the cockpit to clean it. He would request complicated passenger manifest cross-checks at the busiest moments of the meal service. He would make her responsible for a collective punishment, restricting the rest of the cabin crew to the galley for half an hour because of a lag in service only he perceived. Through it all, Emily endured. She absorbed the pressure, the scorn, the isolation, and she did not break. Her calm was a shield. Her professionalism was a weapon. Each perfectly executed task, each polite and unwavering response, was a small act of defiance that chipped away at Davies's authority and planted seeds of doubt among the crew. They had wanted her to fail. They had expected her to crumble. But as the flight crossed the midway point, a new feeling began to creep into the cabin. Respect. A junior flight attendant, a young man named Ben, who had been the most vocal in his dislike of her, watched as Emily expertly handled a belligerent drunk passenger, calming him down and getting him to sleep without raising her voice or needing assistance. Later, during a lull, he approached her in the galley. "That was impressive," he admitted, looking at the floor. "The way you dealt with that guy in 24C. Emily simply nodded, continuing to restock the beverage cart. "He was scared," she said. "Some people mask fear with aggression." "Still," Ben insisted. "I would have called for security as soon as he started shouting." "You handled it." He paused, then added, "The captain, he's been riding you pretty hard." It was an olive branch. A crack in the wall of their collective hostility. "The captain is responsible for the safety of this flight," Emily replied, her voice neutral. "His methods are his own." She offered no criticism, no complaint. She gave him nothing to gossip about, nothing to report back. Her discipline was absolute. And it was this, more than anything, that began to unnerve them all. Who was this woman? In the cockpit, Tanaka found his opportunity. Davies was on his mandated rest break, napping in the small bunk behind the cockpit. Tanaka took out his tablet and connected to the weak satellite Wi-Fi. He typed "Carter Aviation Dynamics" into the search bar. The results were immediate and staggering. It was not a commercial consultancy. It was a highly exclusive, almost mythical, research and development firm that worked on classified projects for the military and experimental aircraft manufacturers. It was founded and run by one man, General Marcus "Eagle" Carter. Tanaka's blood ran cold. He knew that name. Every pilot knew that name. General Carter was a legend, a test pilot from the old school who had flown everything with wings, pushing envelopes and breaking records that still stood today. He was the Chuck Yeager of his generation. He had died 10 years ago. In a crash. Tanaka's fingers flew across the screen, pulling up old news articles. The crash of the XF-47, an experimental stealth fighter prototype. A catastrophic airframe failure during a high-G maneuver. The article mentioned he was survived by his only child, a daughter, who was also a pilot. A test pilot. Co-piloting the plane on that fateful day. He found a grainy photo from the accident report. A young woman with soot on her face and a 1,000-yard stare being led away from the wreckage. The resemblance was undeniable. It was Emily. Suddenly, everything made sense. The 10-year gap in her resume. The unnatural calm under pressure. The way she had scanned the wing before takeoff, not with the cursory glance of a flight attendant, but with the analytical eye of a pilot checking for stress fractures. The white-knuckled grip during the turbulence was not fear of flying. It was memory. It was trauma. She was not just a flight attendant. She was royalty in the world of aviation, hiding in plain sight, working in the cabin of a commercial airliner. The question was, why? Tanaka leaned back, his mind racing. He looked at the cabin monitor, at the woman quietly collecting trash from passengers, and felt a profound sense of awe. He also felt a deep sense of dread. Captain Davies had no idea who he was tormenting. He was a loudmouthed bully poking a sleeping grizzly bear with a sharp stick. And the sky was a very unforgiving place. The first explosion was not loud. It was a deep, resonant thud that vibrated through the very bones of the aircraft. It was followed immediately by a violent yaw to the left. Alarms screamed to life in the cockpit, a cacophony of synthetic voices and piercing sirens. Engine 1 failure, the automated voice announced, its calm tone a horrifying contrast to the reality of the situation. Davies, jolted awake, scrambled back into his seat, his face pale and slack with sleep and sudden fear. What the hell was that? He yelled, his voice cracking. Uncontained failure, port engine. Tanaka shouted over the alarms, his hands already flying across the console, trying to stabilize the plane. We have a fire. Pulling the fire suppression. Davies stared at the warning lights, his mind struggling to catch up. His bravado, his swagger, had vanished, replaced by a raw, naked panic. He fumbled for the controls, his movements clumsy and jerky. Then came the second thud. This one was worse. A gut-wrenching bang from the right side, followed by another vicious lurch. The backup engine. The starboard Trent 700 had ingested debris from the first explosion. Shrapnel from the failed turbine had torn through the wing, severing hydraulic lines and striking the second engine. Engine 2 failure. Engine 2 failure, the computer shrieked. The cockpit lights flickered and died, plunging them into the dim, hellish red glow of the emergency backup lighting. The comforting drone of the engines was gone. Replaced by a terrifying, unnatural silence, broken only by the alarms and the shriek of the wind over the now unpowered airframe. They were a glider. A 300-ton glider, falling out of the sky. Mayday, 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 Tanaka transmitted, his voice tight but controlled. Apex 714, dual engine failure. We are going down. Davies grabbed the yoke, his knuckles white. Shut up, he screamed. I've got it. He pulled back on the yoke, a rookie mistake. A fatal mistake. The nose of the heavy aircraft pitched up, the airspeed bleeding away with terrifying speed. The controls went mushy in his hands. The stall warning horn blared, the most dreaded sound in aviation. The aircraft shuddered, its wings lost their lift, and it began to fall, tumbling into a flat spin. No. Tanaka yelled, trying to push the yoke forward, to get the nose down and regain airflow over the wings. You're stalling us. Push. Push. But Davies was frozen, paralyzed by a terror so complete it had shut down his brain. He was a deer in the headlights, and the ground was rushing up to meet them. In the cabin, it was chaos. Passengers were screaming, oxygen masks had dropped, and the plane was bucking and groaning like a dying beast. The flight attendants were strapped into their seats, their faces masks of terror. All except one. Emily Carter was unbuckling her harness. The spin was disorienting, the negative GS trying to pull her from her seat. But she moved with a purpose that defied the pandemonium. She knew that spin. She had felt it before, in the cockpit of the XF-47. It was the last sensation her father had ever felt. Her trauma screamed at her, a roaring inferno in her mind, telling her to curl up, to give in, to accept the inevitable. But another voice, a quieter, calmer voice, cut through the noise. Her father's voice. Fly the plane, Emily. Never stop flying the plane. She fought her way up the lurching aisle, using the seatbacks to pull herself forward against the sickening forces. She reached the cockpit door. It was locked. She punched in the emergency override code, her fingers finding the keys by muscle memory alone. The door hissed open. The scene inside was a nightmare. Red lights flashed across the panicked faces of the two pilots. Davies was wrestling with the yoke, screaming incoherently. Tanaka was fighting him, trying to break the stall. Get out of the way. Emily's voice cut through the chaos like a laser. It was not loud, but it carried an authority that made both men freeze and look at her. Get out. Davies shrieked, his eyes wild. This is a restricted flight deck. Emily ignored him. Her eyes were scanning the instruments, taking in the airspeed, the altitude, the rate of descent, the spin indicators. Her mind, the mind of a test pilot, was processing thousands of data points a second. You're in a fully developed flat spin, she said, her voice impossibly calm. You're pulling when you should be pushing. You're going to bury us in the Atlantic. She looked at Tanaka. First officer. Get him out of that seat. Now. Tanaka stared at her for a heartbeat, his mind connecting the final dots. The file. The name. The legend. You're Carter's girl, he whispered, a look of utter astonishment on his face. Emily's eyes were cold steel. I'm the pilot. Get him out of the seat, or we all die in 90 seconds. That was all it took. Tanaka unbuckled his harness and launched himself at Davies, dragging the sputtering, resisting captain out of the left-hand seat. Emily slid into place, her hands and feet finding the controls as if they were extensions of her own body. For the first time in 10 years, she was where she belonged. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach. But the training was stronger. Her father's voice was in her ear. Opposite rudder to the spin. Yoke forward to break the stall. Neutral ailerons. Her feet danced on the rudder pedals. Her hands pushed the yoke forward with a firm, steady pressure. The groaning of the airframe intensified. The spin tightened for a terrifying moment. And then, with a sickening lurch, the nose dropped. The spin broke. They were no longer tumbling. They were in a steep, controlled dive, the airspeed screaming past the red line. My God, Tanaka breathed, strapping himself back into his seat. Don't thank him yet, Emily said, her eyes fixed on the horizon, which was a terrifyingly close wall of dark, churning ocean. She pulled back on the yoke, gently at first, then harder, feeling for the limits of the damaged airframe. The G-forces pushed them deep into their seats. The plane groaned in protest, rivets popping in the wings. Slowly, agonizingly, the nose came up. The altimeter unwound with dizzying speed. 10,000 feet. 5,000. 2,000. At 1,000 feet above the waves, she leveled out. They were flying. Or rather, they were gliding. A silent, wounded bird, bleeding altitude with every second that passed. Silence descended on the cockpit, broken only by Emily's steady breathing and the whisper of the wind. Davies was a whimpering heap on the floor. Tanaka was staring at Emily, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. How, he started. No time, Emily cut him off. Status report. What do we have left? Shaken from his stupor, Tanaka's training kicked in. Dual engine failure. Looks like a catastrophic failure in number 1 took out number 2. We've lost primary hydraulics. Switching to backup. Electrical is on battery, maybe 15 minutes of power left. Flight controls are sluggish. Very sluggish. APU. Emily asked, referring to the small auxiliary power unit in the tail that could provide emergency power. Negative. No response. The shrapnel must have severed the fuel line. Emily nodded. It was the worst-case scenario. No engines. No power. Limited control. And 283 souls in the back, trusting them. Where are we? She asked. Tanaka checked the GPS, about 400 miles east of Gander, Newfoundland. We're out of range of everything. There's nothing. He looked at her, his face grim. They were going to have to ditch in the ocean. A maneuver with a survival rate of almost 0 in the frigid North Atlantic. Emily's eyes scanned the dark void ahead. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations. Glide ratio. Airspeed. Altitude. She was a pilot again. More than that, she was her father's daughter. He had taught her things not found in any commercial flight manual. He had taught her how to fly on instinct and air alone. There's a place, she said, her voice quiet but firm. An old Canadian Forces base. It was decommissioned in the 90s. It's not on the commercial charts, but it's there. Runway 22. 9,000 feet of pavement. Tanaka stared at her. How can you possibly know that? My father used to fly out of there, she said simply. He taught me how to land a glider on it when I was 16. She banked the massive, silent plane to the north. Get on the radio, she commanded. Declare the emergency. Give them our position and our intentions. Tell them we are attempting a dead-stick landing at RCAF Blackwood. Tanaka fumbled with the radio, his hands shaking slightly. He relayed the message. The response from the Gander controller was laced with confusion and disbelief. Apex 714, say again. Blackwood is a ghost base. It has been unmaintained for over 2 decades. You cannot land a heavy there. Emily took the radio from Tanaka's hand. Gander Control, this is Apex 714. The captain is incapacitated. This is Acting Captain Emily Carter. We have dual engine failure and 0 thrust. We will not make it to Gander. We are putting this aircraft down on runway 22 at Blackwood. We have no other option. Roll the trucks. I'll see you on the ground. Her voice was pure ice and command. There was no argument from the other end. Just a stunned, Godspeed, Apex 714. The next 20 minutes were the longest in human history for everyone on that plane. Emily flew not by instruments, which were flickering and unreliable on the dying battery, but by sight and feel. She was one with the machine, sensing the currents of the air, feeling the strain on the wings, coaxing every possible foot of glide out of the wounded giant. She had Tanaka call the cabin. She spoke to the passengers, her voice broadcast throughout the plane. She did not lie to them. She told them the engines had failed. She told them they would be making an emergency landing without power. She explained the brace position with a clarity and calm that cut through the fear, instilling a fragile sense of hope in the terrified passengers. In the cabin, the crew, who had heard the commotion from the cockpit, looked at each other in stunned silence. The woman they had scorned, the nervous flyer they had mocked, was now their only chance of survival. And she sounded more confident and in control than Captain Davies ever had. 5 miles out, Tanaka said, his voice a strained whisper. He could see it now on the navigation display, a faint outline of a runway in the middle of a vast, dark wilderness. Gear down, Emily commanded. There was a groaning sound as Tanaka used the emergency manual release to drop the landing gear. Without hydraulic pressure, it fell into place with the help of gravity and airflow. 3 green lights. Gear is down and locked, Tanaka confirmed. Flaps, Emily said. Negative, no power for flaps, Tanaka replied. Emily nodded. No flaps. That meant their landing speed would be dangerously high. She would have one shot at this. One chance to hit a 9,000-foot strip of pavement in the dark, in a crippled 300-ton aircraft with no power and no room for error. The runway lights, of course, were dark. The base was abandoned. She was aiming for a black rectangle in a sea of black. "I can't see it," Tanaka said, his voice tight with panic. "I can," Emily said. She was not looking with her eyes. She was looking with her memory. Seeing the approach her father had made her practice 100 times, a lifetime ago. She saw the line of pine trees at the threshold, the small service road that ran parallel to the runway, the gentle slope of the terrain. She felt the aircraft begin to sink, its energy finally spent. "Hold on," she said, her voice a low murmur. The ground rushed up. The trees at the end of the runway were a black wall. She flared the aircraft, pulling the nose up at the last possible second, trading her last bit of airspeed for a whisper of lift. The stall horn blared again. The plane shuddered. And then, contact. Not a crash, but a firm, solid thud as the main gear kissed the asphalt. It was a perfect touchdown. The nose gear came down seconds later. They were on the ground, but they were still moving at over 150 knots. "Brakes!" Tanaka yelled. "No hydraulics, no brakes." Emily countered. "Reverse thrusters are out." The runway was covered in weeds and cracked pavement, but it was holding. The end of the runway, and a dark forest, was approaching with terrifying speed. Emily's feet were alive on the rudder pedals, keeping the massive plane centered on the crumbling strip. It was then that she did something that made Tanaka's blood freeze. She steered the plane off the runway. She deliberately guided the right main gear onto the soft, grassy shoulder. The drag was immediate and violent. The aircraft slewed sideways, groaning and tearing as the immense forces tried to rip it apart. It was a ground loop, a maneuver that should have been catastrophic. But it was controlled. It was intentional. She was using the earth itself as a brake. The plane spun in a slow, graceful, and utterly terrifying arc, shedding speed with every foot, until it finally came to a stop, not 100 yards from the tree line, perfectly intact. Silence. A profound, absolute silence that was broken only by the frantic pounding of their own hearts. They were alive. They were down. In the cabin, after a moment of stunned disbelief, a single person began to clap. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire cabin erupted in a thunderous, tearful ovation. In the cockpit, Emily Carter rested her forehead against the yoke. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably now, the adrenaline draining away, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. The ghosts of the past, held at bay for so long, came rushing back. But this time, they did not scream. They whispered. And for the first time in 10 years, they sounded like peace. Tanaka just stared at her, his mouth agape. "That was the greatest feat of airmanship I have ever seen in my life," he said, his voice filled with a reverence that bordered on worship. Emily did not respond. She just breathed. The flashing lights of emergency vehicles appeared in the distance, racing down the old service road toward them. The cavalry had arrived. When the cabin door was finally opened, the first person to board was not a paramedic or a firefighter. He was a man in an expensive suit, his face etched with worry. He bypassed the stunned crew and passengers and strode directly to the cockpit. He was Mark Henderson, the CEO of Apex Air. A retired Air Force general. And a man who had flown with Marcus "Eagle" Carter. He stopped in the doorway of the cockpit, taking in the scene. He saw the whimpering, disgraced figure of Captain Davies, being tended to by a flight attendant. He saw First Officer Tanaka, who looked like he had just seen a ghost. And he saw Emily Carter, still in the captain's seat, looking small and tired, but radiating an aura of unshakable competence. Henderson's eyes, the eyes of a commander, missed nothing. He saw the dead instrument panel. He saw the position of the aircraft, just shy of the trees. He understood immediately what had happened here. What she had done. He ignored Davies completely. He walked over to Emily. "Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your father, he would have been so damn proud." Emily looked up at him, and for the first time, a tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. Henderson then turned, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury as he looked at Davies. "Captain Davies," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You are relieved of command. You are suspended pending a full investigation. Get your personal effects and get off my airplane. You are a disgrace to the uniform and to every pilot who has ever worn it." Davies opened his mouth to protest, to make an excuse. "But sir, the engines." "I do not want to hear your voice," Henderson snarled, cutting him off. "I have the cockpit voice recorder data streaming to my tablet. I heard your panic. I heard your incompetence. And I heard this woman, who you have been harassing for the last 5 hours, save 283 lives while you cried on the floor." He pointed a trembling finger toward the door. "Get out." Davies, stripped of his authority and his dignity, scrambled to his feet and scurried out of the cockpit, unable to meet the eyes of the crew who had witnessed his utter humiliation. His career was over. His fall from grace was total, public, and absolute. Henderson turned back to Emily. His expression softened. "I tried to call you, after the accident," he said quietly. "You disappeared." "I had to," Emily whispered. I couldn't fly anymore." "You seem to have remembered how," Henderson said with a small smile. He looked around the cockpit. "I never should have let them put you in the cabin. I knew who you were. I just respected your wish for anonymity. That was my mistake. It won't happen again." He extended his hand. "Welcome back to the left seat, Captain Carter. You've earned it." In the days that followed, the story of Apex Air Flight 714 became a global phenomenon. Emily Carter was hailed as a hero. The quiet, unassuming flight attendant was revealed to be a pilot of extraordinary skill, the prodigal daughter of an aviation legend. The investigation laid the blame for the incident squarely on a manufacturing defect in the turbine blades. It also produced a scathing report on the conduct of John Davies, officially ending his career and stripping him of his license. The other crew members, led by the young flight attendant Ben, approached Emily at the hotel where they were being debriefed. One by one, they apologized for their judgment, their coldness, their complicity in Davies's harassment. Emily accepted their apologies with a simple, forgiving nod. She held no grudges. There was no room for it anymore. Her life had been given back to her in that dark, silent cockpit, and she intended to live it. A week later, she was in Mark Henderson's office at Apex headquarters. "The world is your oyster, Emily," he said, sitting across from her. "Any route, any aircraft. You name it. It's yours." Emily looked out the window at the planes taking off and landing. "I don't want a route," she said. Henderson looked surprised. "Then what do you want?" "I want to run your training program," she said, her voice filled with a new purpose. "I want to head your simulator division. I want to find the next generation of pilots. Especially the women. The ones who get told they don't belong, the ones who have to work twice as hard to get half the respect." She turned to face him, her eyes burning with a passion he had not seen before. "I want to make sure that what happened to me, with a captain like Davies, never happens to anyone else again. I want to build a culture of respect, not arrogance. Of skill, not swagger." Henderson leaned back in his chair, a slow, wide smile spreading across his face. He had expected her to want glory. Instead, she wanted to serve. Just like her father. "The job is yours," he said without hesitation. "Build the program. You have an unlimited budget." The story ended not in the sky, but on the ground. Months later, in a state-of-the-art A330 simulator, Emily Carter stood behind a young female pilot, her hand resting gently on the back of the trainee's chair. The young woman was struggling with a complex emergency procedure, her frustration mounting. "I can't do it," the trainee said, her voice shaking. "It's too much." Emily leaned in, her voice calm and reassuring. "Yes, you can," she said. "Forget the alarms. Forget the warnings. Feel the aircraft. Listen to what it's telling you." She paused. "And never stop flying the plane." The words, once a source of so much pain, were now a mantra of hope. A legacy passed down. A promise kept. Emily Carter looked at the simulated horizon, no longer a ghost in the machine, but a master of it. She was home.